Hey, church, and welcome to worship. If you're a guest with us today, we are so excited that you are here. We're going to take a moment to talk about a few things happening this week at Crossroads. Today is your last opportunity to get those Operation Christmas Child boxes in. So we hope that you will grab a box, take it home, fill it up really fast, and bring it back, or simply add the items that you forgot to bring today and bring it back to the church. But those are due today. We thank you for your help with this important ministry, and we are excited about where those boxes are headed from here. Tonight is our Thanksgiving dinner at 5:30 p.m. We hope that you will join us, bring friends and neighbors, and a covered dish, a dessert or a side dish. The meat, the potatoes, the dressing will all be provided, and we hope that we will have a great time celebrating Thanksgiving together as a church tonight at 5:30. Afterwards, Sunday Night Live will have their Christmas practice, but there will be no student ministry or Little Lambs meeting after Thanksgiving dinner. As you know, we are always looking for ways to love on our community, and we have been asked to help ring bells for Macon County Ministries at CNR and Pringers during the Christmas season. If you would be willing to serve for just 1 hour starting on December 1st, we have several dates and hour-long shifts to fill. We hope that you will prayerfully consider this opportunity to serve in this way and support Macon County Christian Ministries and our community. Finally, Respite Night is coming up on December 2nd. This is an amazing opportunity for our church to love on families with special needs and give parents of children with special needs the night off. We hope that you will consider becoming a buddy, a volunteer at this program through proper training sessions that we will provide. And we are also hoping that you will think of and invite families of children with special needs to participate in this important program. To learn more about Respite Night, which will be held on December 2nd, visit MaconCrossroads.com. That's it for this week. We hope that you enjoy worship.
So we've been studying the book of Revelation together, and throughout this study, we've wanted to make things as easy as possible, questions to be answered. And so just a reminder, if you're just jumping in on our website, we've made additional resources available under Revelation Study. You can go to the website, find all those. You can find further study, lectures. You can also find a place to post questions, and we will get back to you on those over the next 7 days. So all of those resources are available if you want to study deeper than even where we're at on Sunday mornings. So far together, we've laid the foundation as we have looked to break this code, and the code that we're breaking is not put all these pieces together and be able to figure out how the world comes to an end. The code that we're breaking is, how do we put these pieces together in this letter together to be able to see Jesus more clearly? That's the goal of this. The goal is not to, look at the end times. The goal is, by looking at what we've been given, to be able to see Jesus better. That's the goal. That's the code we're breaking together. And so through this process, we've laid the foundation that the book of Revelation is not for prediction, it's for preparation. It's not for prediction, it's for preparation. It's to prepare us for the someday when Jesus will come back. Last week we looked at some of the letters that were written or the words that Jesus spoke to some of the early churches in Asia Minor. And they come with very stern very forthcoming warnings to these churches of, listen, you're doing these well, but listen, these are some areas in your life that you've got to get straightened out. These are some things in your church that are drifting. And I mean, some of the churches were struggling with false teaching. Some of them had lost their passion and their first love for Jesus. Some of them had fallen prey to sexual immorality. And all of these different struggles. And so Jesus speaks to these churches and he says, listen, you're the hope of the world, so live that way. And that's where we kind of landed last week. And as we continue to look at Jesus through the book of Revelation, this morning we are invited into a room, and it's a room that maybe we've never been before. We're invited to step into this worship scene that no matter what things look like on this earth, breathes hope into our lives. And that's what my hope and prayer is this morning. I want to pray, and then we're going to jump right in. God, we are grateful for your church. God, we're thankful this morning that we can be here together and laugh together and learn together. And Lord, I pray that as we do that, God, your Spirit will make things clear. Father, I pray that you will speak with clarity. God, I pray that as we look at these words, Father, our hearts will be ready to worship. Father, our minds will be ready to comprehend the truth of your word. God, our eyes will be open to see the things that you need us to see. Lord, I'm thankful that because of Jesus and because of him willing to give his life on a cross, a room full of sinful people, God, we can all meet here together right now. And we can speak of how good you are in our lives. God, we're grateful for this opportunity. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Have you ever been distracted? Where you set out to do a task, and then before you know it, you've done 4 other tasks, but you've never done the one that you set out to do? Have you ever been distracted? And maybe it's a distraction of another kind. Have you ever been to a movie theater and the guy or person down in front of you is on their cell phone with brightness like through the roof? And it's like, man, put that phone away or I'm about to throw it out the window. You know, like I'm going to get rid of it. You know, a distraction like that. Maybe you've been in a meeting for work or a meeting for a club that you're in, and there's someone off to the side having like a side conversation. You're trying to pay attention, but then there's this conversation, and so you're distracted. You can't completely focus in. Maybe it's just something simple like the end of the night, you know, you're kind of winding down, you've got something on TV and your husband is snoring like in the recliner, all out. And you're like, just be quiet, you know, like distraction. They distract you from something that you really need or want to be doing. We've all been distracted. Maybe on a different level though. Have you ever been distracted during worship? During worship, during our time of worship, have you ever been distracted? Maybe you're just getting to the part of the song that you really love to sing and you feel your cell phone buzz in your pocket or your purse and you think, I'll just check it real quick. Maybe you come in on Sunday morning ready to sing, but your mind is drowned by all of the struggles and the tensions outside of this room. And in moments where you are meant to sing the loudest, you can barely sing because your mind is just consumed with all of the distractions. Maybe you're distracted with doubts of the songs that you're even singing. I don't know if I really even believe this. Maybe it's a distraction of worrying what other people are going to think if they hear you sing. Have you ever been distracted during worship? You see, this is much where the early churches are at. They've been distracted by the world, and as Jesus brings very truthful words to these churches, they are caught in their distraction. And if we were to try to place ourselves in the shoes of these early churches, persecution is at an all-time high. The churches having to sometimes meet in secret, sometimes not, but sometimes they do. Because if they're caught, they will be called out in front of everyone. Tension around them is at an all-time high. And so you're already facing all of these things in life. And then you get this letter from this guy named John speaking of this revelation that he got. And what is found in this letter is you being called out again for all the things that you're doing wrong. And you can imagine how defeating this would be, right? layer after layer where you feel like you're just getting taken out at the knees by the culture around you, by the tension of the world around you, and now from even people within the church. And I think that both John and Jesus knew that on the coattails of Revelation chapter 2 and 3, you desperately need chapters 4 and 5. After the correction of chapters 2 and 3 to these early churches, there is so much of a need for the hope and the encouragement that is found in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. If you brought a Bible this morning, go ahead and open up there. Revelation, last book in the Bible. Revelation 4 and 5 is where we're going to be. We're going to move through them together. You see, in Revelation chapter 4, we are invited into a scene. We're invited into a scene of worship that can bring tears to your eyes. You see, all of the stress, all of the persecution, all of the discomfort, all of the correction that the early churches have been facing and that sometimes we feel in life, it falls prey to the magnificence of Revelation 4 and 5. In Revelation 4 and 5, there's a lot that we can be distracted with. But if we see what John is writing, we get a glimpse. We get a glimpse of something that is almost indescribable. And what we have to keep in mind before we begin reading is John is invited into this room. I mean, literally, he opened the door right in the beginning. He's invited into this room, and as he steps into this room, he sees in heaven something that is indescribable. And so he is describing something that no one else has a frame of reference for. It's like if you go on a trip someplace and you experience something and you come back and you try to tell someone what it is that you experienced, but they have no idea what it's like. A couple years ago, I went to Haiti, and I remember going to one of the hospitals in Haiti, one of the most atrocious things I've ever seen in my life. And I remember coming back and trying to explain that to others, and I literally didn't have words to describe what I saw and experienced within these hospitals. And so then I began to use phrases like, well, it was like. It's exactly what John is doing here, is he communicates to these early churches. He says, listen, this is what I've seen, and it's like. It's like, and he communicates in ways that often they can understand. So this morning, I don't know what you walked in the room with, but for a few moments, let us be encouraged. For a few moments, let us find hope. For a few moments, let us worship together, where we shut down whatever we walked in with, and we celebrate together as we step into this door as well. Revelation chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, says this. After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here. I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like the emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne, there were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles, and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also, in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third was like the face of a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and were covered with eyes all around them. Even under its wings, day and night, they never stopped saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And we're going to pause here. John begins to paint this picture of what he sees when he steps through this door into heaven. This worship experience, this worship scene that he begins to paint. And these verses are laced with imagery of what is in front of him. He begins to describe the person that is sitting on this throne, and he uses words of ruby and jasper, both fine, precious jewels, refined through the fire, which these begin to depict the holiness of God. Behind the throne is a rainbow. The rainbow speaks of all the way back in Genesis where we see God's mercy. This past week I received an email from a missionary I'm friends with. He works among Muslim people, and he had to go into a mosque to speak with the Muslim leadership of the community and ask them some questions. And the problem was that when he needed to ask them some questions was a time when you were not supposed to enter the mosque and interrupt what was going on. However, it had to happen. And so he sat out in front of the mosque in his car, and he just prayed, God, if it is possible, give me something that says it is a good time to go into the mosque. And he sat there and he prayed for a few minutes. And when he looked up, in the dark and dreary sky that had been there all day was a double rainbow stretched across the sky. And he looked at that rainbow and he said, all right, God, I'm going to take this as you're good. And the rest of the email, he began to describe how as he walked in, it was the perfect time for him to step into the meeting. There was a break in what they were doing. The elders of the mosque were excited to see him, and the meeting went perfect. You see, God is merciful. A rainbow that's painted behind this throne speaks of that mercy. And then you see this word, the throne. The throne, I mean, this is laced and written in the bedrock of our theology that someday we are going to stand before a throne and worship the God above. I mean, that's what we look forward to. And so John is standing before that very throne, looking and seeing the magnificence, the mercy, and the holiness of God right before him. And then he begins to describe what's going on around the throne. And around the throne, it says that there are 24 other thrones. And this is where the train could get off the tracks real quick. Okay, but we're not going to let it. We're going to hold tight to be able to get this clear picture of what John is describing. What are these 24 thrones for? I know you came this morning for great wisdom, so here it is. I don't know. All right? And there's not a person this side of heaven that knows. There are a lot of good guesses. There are a lot of deep studies. There's a lot of guys way smarter than me that have looked into it. But with all of these different ideas, the one that I would align with and teach forward is that 12 is a number of completion. I mean, all the way through ancient times, 12 is a number of completion. We've talked about this before. There are 12 months in a year. And so numbers derivative of 12, being 24, okay, show a sign of completion. Who sits on these thrones? I would subscribe to the idea, maybe the best idea, is that there are 12 Old Testament tribes. Okay, so there are 12 tribes in the Old Testament. There was 12 disciples. And so seated on these thrones around God is this idea of completion from the very beginning to where it's at this moment, looking ahead, that God's people are around the throne. Then we see the number 7. Okay, 7 lamps are blazing. And I mean, John tells us what this is. These are the 7 spirits of God. 7 is the number of perfection. And so we see, once again, this illustration of the perfection of God around his throne. And then he paints a picture for us in just one verse. He says, also in front of the throne was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. And it's real easy to read over that, but we can't miss it. You see, during ancient time periods, a sea was a sign of conflict. The sea was looked at as evil. The sea was looked at as unpredictable and untamed. And so I know we don't live in close proximity to many seas here in Macon, all right? But these people did. All right, and so they lived within proximity of different seas, and their understanding of the sea was that it was choppy and it was rough, and they lost friends in the sea who were fishermen, and so the sea was seen as evil. And so now, what is common for them to understand as wrong, evil, untamable, now it's depicted in a picture of heaven as so calm and so clear, it looks like a piece of glass. Again, imagery of the power and the perfection of God. He then begins to describe the different creatures that are around. And we've got one that looks like an lion, and one that has the face of a man, one bird of the air, one of the ox of the ground. And you see Psalm 96 of all creation coming together to praise the God who is above. And it's almost as though John, as he paints this picture, writing to these early churches, he's asking them, listen, on the coattails of this correction, what is your attitude of worship? What is your attitude of worship? As we look at the perfection of God and the imperfection of humanity, what is our attitude of worship? The same question that we could ask today. What is our attitude of worship when we walk in these doors? Is there excitement? Is there joy in our voice? Is there some movement in our body? Or when we worship, does it look like we were just beaten with a metal rod? I'm not saying we have to hop around and be crazy and everything just to worship. But when we worship, there should be joy that exudes throughout the room. There should be excitement that we get the privilege week in and week out of standing before an almighty perfect God and saying how good you are. Returning God's goodness through our voice, celebrating who he is. We get one shot at that all week corporately. Are we excited about it? Are we filled with joy about it? Or have we become distracted? You see, friends, our truth this morning is the way we worship displays who we worship. The way we worship displays who we worship. And if we look like we're downtrodden, beat down, and not excited about Jesus at all, what does that communicate about the Jesus that we serve? If we look miserable in the time when we should be in the biggest moment of celebration, what does that say about the perfect God that we are going to stand before one day? It sometimes is hard to connect the two, but it's the very act of what worship is. It's connecting the two. It's the humanity of us and the eternity of God coming together in celebration. The way we worship displays who we worship. And it says day and night, never stop saying holy, holy, holy. Repetition of 3 shows extra importance. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. In Revelation chapter 5, John is observing, and we see the conflict between humanity and eternity collide. In Revelation chapter 5, we see the humanity of John literally come face to face with the eternity that he is observing. Revelation chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, it says, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, 'Who is worthy to break the seal and open the scroll?' But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside." You see, momentarily John forgets the power of Jesus. He forgets the perfection of Jesus. Momentarily, John forgets who it is that he's worshiping, and he begins to weep. And I wonder how many of us, we could find ourselves standing in John's shoes. We have forgotten about the power and the majesty of Jesus. And so we weep because of conditions. Maybe not even physically, but our heart aches and weeps because we feel like he's not able. We weep because of struggles at home, and we think to ourselves as our problems seem to grow bigger that God seems to grow smaller, and so we weep and we say, no one is able. As tensions rise at work, it seems as though our tensions get bigger and God gets smaller, and we say, no one is able. And we forget who we're worshiping. You see, John momentarily forgets who it is that he's worshiping, and that there is someone that is able. Then in verse 5 it says, then one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion, the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing in the corner of the throne. And so we get this picture of Jesus right here, that he is seen as a lion, power, okay, ruler. And then when he looks over, he is seen as a lamb, innocent. You see, the full picture of Jesus is brought forward. It says the lamb who had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. Jesus, perfect Jesus, he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders, fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. You see, as we are invited into this room of worship, and there's a moment where all creatures, where all of humanity falls before the perfection of Jesus and says, it is you that I worship, and you are enough. It is you that we worship because you bring all of this together. It is you that we celebrate. And as we celebrate, we are filled with hope that you are able, that you are enough. Matt Proctor, the president of Ozark Christian College, he describes this scene this way. I love the way he describes it. He says, when you walk through the open door of Revelation 4, you enter the throne room of heaven. You suck in your breath, shield your eyes from the dazzling light, and drop to your knees in fear and wonder. Incense fills your nostrils. An angelic voice so vast that you have to count it by the 10,000 shakes the very foundation of the sky with their praise. The countless thundering voices rumble in your chest, the noise so loud you can't hear yourself think. As you trace their attention, you find that every being in heaven is focused on the throne. At the center of the throne is a majestic God, so holy that he cannot be named, so glorious that the only way John can paint him is with dipping his brush in thunder, lightning, rainbows, and jewels. The vision of God on the throne is meant to recalibrate our imagination, swiveling the universe on the hinges of a single image. In worship, we see the throne, and these earthly fears assume their proper size. In light of God's power, they are frail and finite. Be encouraged, small persecuted church. Be warned, haughty Roman Empire. Tremble with fear, Satan and your darkness. God is on the throne and at the center of all things. You see, it is God who sits on his throne. It is Jesus who leads in his perfection, that no matter what is going on in the world around us, be encouraged because he is on the throne. When we remember who we're worshiping, we have no reason to weep because Jesus is able. Because he's there. Because he's present. Mark Batterson wrote in one of his recent books, instead of talking to God about the size of your mountains, talk to your mountains about the size of your God. You see, so many times we allow the world around us to sneak in and steal our joy and celebration. But friends, we can no longer allow the world to distract our worship. Our God deserves better. Our God deserves trust. Our God deserves more. You see, the way we worship displays who we worship. Has your view of God shrunk because your problems have gotten so big? Have you allowed Satan to sneak in and remind you of all the things that are going wrong instead of the God who is right? You see, on the coattails of the correction, John and Jesus knew there was a need for encouragement. And the best way to be encouraged is through a clear picture of Jesus. And as John opens this door and walks in and begins to describe what he sees, we get a high picture of God. And as A.W. Tozer says, a low view of God is the cause of 100 lesser evils. But a person with a high view of God is relieved of 10,000 temporary problems. You see, friends, we have a God whose magnitude and power is larger than anything we can comprehend. We serve a Jesus who sits on his throne and who is not shaken, twisted, or turned away by the struggles of this earth. We serve a Jesus who went to a cross for you and me so we can walk through this same door. And this morning, I know some of us, we walked in with joys, but some of us walked in with struggles. And some of us this morning, we walked in with struggles so big that we have forgotten about the size of the God that we're worshiping. For some of us, we've forgotten who we are worshiping altogether. We do it out of routine if we know the song, but sometimes we don't like it, so we don't sing it. And so we have forgotten who it is that we are worshiping. And the way that we worship displays who we worship. And so, friends, what is our attitude of worship? Is it focused on Jesus, or is it distracted by the world? This morning, I want us to end just a little bit different than maybe the way we normally end. I want us to go ahead and stand together. The last part of chapter 5, I feel would be a disservice for me to just read for you. Because the last part of chapter 5 is a moment in worship where every creature, every person, every tongue and tribe and nation together around the throne of Jesus, they say, it's all about you. And so this morning, that's what we're going to do. We're going to read together. I will instruct where, but as corporate worship takes place in chapter 5, corporate worship is going to take place here. That's what God's word is about. It's for us to interact with it. And as he explains who Jesus is, we're going to celebrate who Jesus is. When I point to you, that's when we read together. And they sang a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on earth. Pause. Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creature and the elders. In a loud voice, they were saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. Pause. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth, under the earth, and on the sea, and that is in them, saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. Pause. The four living creatures said, amen. And the elders fell down and worshiped. Friends, that's the Jesus that we celebrate. That's the Jesus who sits on the throne. That's the Jesus who's not intimidated by our struggles. And we cannot allow the world to distract our worship anymore. For just a moment, friends, forget about what everybody else sounds like around you. Forget about the distractions you brought in. And sing. Worship. celebrate the goodness of God, and let our attitude of worship in the reflection of the cross and the hope of heaven be joy. Let us sing together.